Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squad for boxing news and views from around the internet. The Ukrainian heavyweight Vladislav Sirenko has advanced to 16-0 following a unanimous decision win over Kamil Sokolowski in Ukraine. So this was quite an interesting fight because it was very good rounds for Sirenko against a guy tough, durable, but often does come off second best in terms of the outcome and the result of the fight. No different here, but Sirenko deserved the win, comfortably won it on my card, 6 rounds to 2. I'm not sure what the official scores were, but judging by the Ukrainian TV coverage, the highlight packages in between rounds, you would think that Sokolowski didn't even land, but very competitive early on. But after about round 2, Sirenko really settled into his work and took over. There were a few concerning things which I'll get to, but also a few questions as well, and the what next, that's also another question. But we'll quickly go through the action because it was a very competitive start to this, trading jabs. That first round really was a war of the jabs, the battle of the jabs, and I actually thought that Kamil Sokolowski was getting the best of it, and primarily that was because Vladislav Sirenko just wasn't really moving his head. He was eating jabs like Tic Tacs. Round 2 though, Sirenko started to sort of get into his work, started to settle in there. He was landing some good shots, left hooks, and in particular the overhand right was starting to find a home. And it wasn't that Kamil Sokolowski looked hurt or anything like that, but you could tell it was getting his respect. He was certainly noticing it when it was catching him. Later in the fight, he did end up sort of wearing a couple of shots where you sort of thought, yeah, he's a little bit rocked there. But from round 2 onwards, or round 3 onwards, I should say, Sirenko basically, he'd got the read on Sokolowski, what he could and couldn't do, the sort of power, what he was getting hit with. And he was coming forward, sometimes just straight in, no respect for Sokolowski. But Sokolowski still landing some good shots to the body, targeting that head with the jab. But it was a case that Sirenko, confident in what he was doing, was just landing more, outworking more. And I was thinking, this is quite a decent tempo compared to some other Sirenko fights that I've seen. He really was pushing the pace at times. But then I saw down the left hand corner of the screen, because I thought it was at least 10 rounds, but no, it was an 8-round fight. So to me, that sort of explained, okay, this is why he's pushing the tempo so much. Later in the fight, though, I thought that, especially in the final round or 2, he did look a little bit fatigued, but through rounds 4 to about 7, it was pretty much the same sort of pattern. Sirenko getting the best of the action, landing the cleaner work overall, and some of the most effective work in the fight was the straight right hand, which I didn't think Sirenko threw enough of. He was looking too much for the overhand right. He was having varying degrees of success with it, catching Sokolowski at times, and sort of, especially later in the fight, he looked a little bit more sort of buzzed from a couple of those shots. He would get on his bike for 10 or 15 seconds, but there was one straight right in round 6 in particular that really did seem to rock Sokolowski. And from about the 5th round on, I did think that Sokolowski, who did get a little cut on the bridge of his nose earlier in the fight, from round 5 onwards, he looked like he was starting to be a little bit wary in there. But so too Sirenko, because ahead of that 8th and final round, his trainer James Ali Bashir was imploring him, as quote here, direct quote, knock his ass out. Wake up. What's the matter with you? And then even during that round, he was saying, step up and get it done. But Sirenko just unable to get the job done in the end. And I sort of thought through the pace and the tempo of the fight that he had pushed, that he looked himself just a little bit sort of fatigued by the end, and he just wasn't able to sort of put his punches together in the way that he was earlier in the fight. I think if it had have gone for another few rounds, probably he would have kept hurting Sokolowski, maybe even stopped him or dropped him, because I was sort of thinking a direct comparison with Zan Kossobutski, who fought him in 2020. This is Sokolowski, and it was only really sort of towards the end of that fight that he really was able to get the best of Sokolowski and drop him to the canvas. But Sokolowski, yeah, held on. The last round or 2 looked a little bit more like survival than sort of being competitive in the fight. But overall, very good rounds for Vladislav Sirenko, and this is what Sokolowski does. He is a very tough, durable, and game journeyman, and certainly early on with some of the shots that he was throwing, he was in the fight, and I gave him round 1, and I also thought that he took round 5. That was just a round where I thought, at least, he was landing a few more cleaner shots, and there was 1 or 2 uppercuts and overhand rights for Sokolowski that I gave him the round. But as I say, the Ukrainian broadcaster was giving him 0 credit in the highlights packages between rounds. But a couple of concerning things for Sirenko going forward, or talking points maybe we should call them. I mean, I did think that the gas tank later in the fight did wonder, had he actually paced himself right. But we have seen in other fights where he sort of slowed down towards the end of fights. But the power, he wasn't really able to hurt Sokolowski to the point where you thought he was in real trouble. Did manage to clock him a few times where he was buzzed and rocked, but he was able to gather and recover and get back into the fight. I thought that the straight right hand was an effective punch, just didn't throw it enough. He was looking for those looping overhand rights, and also the left hook, a favourite punch of his. And as I mentioned earlier, the head movement, sometimes it was just non-existent. And when he was trying to be defensively responsible, there were stretches where he was getting out of the way of punches and making Sokolowski miss badly. But for the most part, especially when jabs were coming his way, he was just eating them. And you could see just, under his eyes, he was starting to mark up a bit. And that was just because he was just taking them. But it seemed to be that he was taking some shots from Sokolowski to get away his own work. And clearly that's not going to work when you get a little higher up the levels. And I guess in terms of that, where are they taking him? Because no offense to Kamil Sokolowski, but he's at a certain level. I had thought that Sirenko was already past that sort of stage, that he was already 15 fights deep. They needed to do a bit better in terms of the opposition and put their hands in their pocket and pay for someone that he can start to get a ranking, that he can start climbing up the sort of heavyweight division. Because it feels like the last year and a half, it's really been treading water. He'd gone from a guy that sort of was starting to catch people's eye about 2 years or so ago, and he really doesn't seem to have done much since. It sort of seems to just be stagnating to some extent. And I don't know what they're going to do in terms of, getting him on some bigger shows or potentially get him bigger opposition, potentially even fighting outside of Europe. I don't know. I think there's lots of opportunities for co-promotional deals, as we've seen with other heavyweights, to fight elsewhere, US, UK, and to build his profile. I think he needs that as well, because he is a fighter who's somewhat toiling in obscurity compared to other heavyweights who have a similar talent level. Definitely is a good heavyweight, but yeah, just not really sure what they're doing with him. And I guess that question about the power as he's been sort of climbing up a little bit, it does sort of seem that maybe like a guy like a Joseph Parker, he's got decent pop, but it's not really world level pop, and he is going to have to rely on his skills, activity, footwork, hand speed, that sort of thing. But what did you make of this performance? Drop a comment loud and often, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.